You are not poor because you lack potential. You are poor because your mind was trained to expect less. Before you ever made your first dollar, before you ever tried to change your life, before you ever understood what success really meant, your mind was already being programmed. Programmed by what you heard, programmed by what you saw, programmed by the fears of people who never escaped their own limitations. And now, even when you want more, something inside you keeps pulling you back to the same level. You dream bigger, but you choose smaller. You say you want wealth, but your nervous system still feels safe in lack. You try to move forward, but a hidden voice inside keeps whispering, people like you don't go that far. That voice is not the truth. It is programming. And in this video, you're going to discover how that programming was installed, how it controls your money, your discipline, your faith, your decisions, and how to begin breaking it today. Before we go deeper, I want you to do something simple but powerful. If this message speaks to you, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear may expose the exact mental pattern that has been keeping you stuck for years. And comment below, I refuse to stay programmed for lack. Write it as a decision, not as motivation, as a command to your own mind. Now let's begin. The difference between financial poverty and mental poverty. There is a difference that most people never truly understand. Financial poverty is a situation. Mental poverty is a pattern. One can change quickly. The other controls everything. You can give someone money, and for a moment, their life improves. Bills get paid. Pressure decreases. There's relief. But if the internal pattern doesn't change, that same person will slowly return to the exact same level they were before. Not because they're unlucky, not because they lack opportunity, but because their mind is calibrated to a specific reality. This is why some people win money and lose it, why some people grow and then collapse, why some people start strong, but always find a way to restart again, because deep down, they are not operating from abundance. They are operating from a familiar identity. And the mind will always try to protect what feels familiar, even if that familiarity is limitation. Mental poverty is not about how much money you have. It's about how you interpret life. It's about what you expect. It's about what feels normal to you. If struggle feels normal, you will recreate it. If instability feels normal, you will tolerate it. If lack feels familiar, you will unconsciously return to it. Most people think they want success, but what they actually want is relief from discomfort. And there's a difference. Success requires expansion, growth, uncertainty. But the mind that was programmed in limitation does not seek expansion. It seeks safety. And safety is found in what it already knows. This is why you can be motivated one day and completely disconnected the next. Why you can feel powerful and suddenly feel doubt again. Why you can decide to change and still go back to old behaviors. It's not inconsistency, it's conditioning. Because your conscious mind can desire one thing, but your subconscious is still protecting another. And when there is conflict between the two, the subconscious always wins. This is the part most people ignore. They try to change their actions without changing their internal structure. They try to force discipline without rewiring identity. They try to think positive while still feeling unworthy. And that creates tension, exhaustion, frustration, because you're trying to move forward with a mind that was trained to hold you back. Financial poverty can be solved with opportunity. Mental poverty can only be solved with awareness, because once you see the pattern, you stop blaming circumstances, and you start understanding the real source. And the moment you understand this, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, What inside me keeps recreating this? That question changes everything. Because now, you're no longer reacting to life. You're starting to observe the system that creates it. And once you see the system, you can begin to change it. But before you can change it, you need to understand where it came from. And that's exactly what we're going to uncover next. How your programming was installed without you realizing your mind was not programmed overnight. It didn't happen in one moment. It happened slowly, silently, repeatedly. Before you had the ability to question anything, you were already absorbing everything. As a child, you didn't choose your beliefs. You inherited them. Every phrase you heard about money was stored. Money is hard to make. Rich people are different. We can't afford that. That's not for people like us. At the time, you didn't analyze those words. You accepted them. Because when you're a child, your mind is not designed to filter reality. It's designed to learn it. And learning comes through repetition and emotion, not logic. So if you repeatedly saw stress around money, if you felt tension when bills arrived, if you noticed fear in the voices of the people around you, your mind wasn't just observing that. It was associating money with pressure, with anxiety, with limitation. And without realizing, you began forming internal rules. Rules like, money creates problems. Wanting more is dangerous. Staying safe is better than taking risks. But it didn't stop there. Because programming doesn't come only from what is said. It also comes from what is modeled. If the people around you gave up easily, you learned that effort leads to frustration. If they avoided opportunities, you learned that growth is risky. If they stayed in the same place for years, you learned that change is unlikely. And again, you didn't question it. You absorbed it as truth. This is how your subconscious was built. Not through a conscious decision, but through exposure, repetition, emotion. And here's the part most people don't want to face. Even if you consciously want a different life today, your subconscious is still loyal to the environment that created it. It is still trying to protect you, based on rules that were formed years ago. Rules that may not even make sense anymore, but still feel real. That's why you can say, I want to grow, but hesitate when an opportunity appears. That's why you can say, I want more money, but feel uncomfortable when you start earning more. That's why you can say, I'm ready to change, but still fall back into the same patterns. Because your mind is not reacting to the present. It is reacting to the past. And until you understand this, you will keep trying to fix your life at the surface, while the root remains untouched. This is not weakness. This is conditioning. And once you see it clearly, you stop taking it personally. You stop thinking, there's something wrong with me. And you start realizing there is a program running inside me. And anything that was programmed can be reprogrammed. But before we talk about how to change it, you need to understand something even deeper. Because this programming didn't just create beliefs, it created an identity. And that identity may be the very thing keeping you where you are. The identity trap. Why you keep returning to the same level. There is something even more powerful than your thoughts. More powerful than your habits. More powerful than your goals. Your identity. Because at the end of the day, you don't act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. You can say you want wealth. But if you still see yourself as someone who struggles, you will unconsciously recreate struggle. You can say you want discipline. But if you still identify as someone inconsistent, you will always find a way to break your own momentum. This is the trap, because identity is invisible, but it controls everything. Most people think they are trying to build a better life, but what they are actually doing is trying to build a new life on top of an old identity, and that creates friction. Internal resistance, because your actions are trying to move forward, but your identity's pulling you back. And here's what makes it even more dangerous. Your identity feels like truth, not like a belief, not like a pattern, but like reality. When you think, I'm not good with money, I've never been disciplined, I always mess things up, that doesn't feel like programming. That feels like a description of who you are. And once something becomes part of your identity, your mind will do everything it can to protect it, even if that identity is limiting you. This is why people sabotage themselves. Not consciously, but automatically. You start making progress, and suddenly you procrastinate. You get close to an opportunity, and suddenly you hesitate. You begin to grow, and suddenly you doubt yourself. It's not random. It's your identity defending itself. Because from the perspective of your subconscious, changing your life is not the priority. Staying consistent with who you believe you are is. And if success feels unfamiliar, if growth feels uncomfortable, if abundance feels not like you, your mind will create ways to bring you back to what feels normal, even if that normal is limitation. That's why some people get money and lose it, get opportunities and waste them, start strong and disappear, not because they lack ability, but because they are acting from an identity that cannot sustain what they are trying to build. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. So if your identity is still rooted in lack, fear, doubt, survival, then no matter how much motivation you feel, you will eventually return to that baseline. Because identity creates a set point, a level your life always comes back to. That's why change feels temporary for most people. They change behavior, but not self-perception. They change effort, but not identity. They change actions, but not internal standards. And without changing identity, everything else collapses. Now here's where it gets deeper. Your identity is not just something you think. It is something you feel. It's in your reactions, your comfort zones, your emotional patterns. For example, if you feel uncomfortable charging more for your work, that's identity. If you feel guilty wanting more money, that's identity. If you feel like you need permission to grow, that's identity. And as long as those feelings exist, you will keep making decisions that match them. This is why two people can have the same opportunity and get completely different results. One sees possibility. The other sees risk. One moves forward. The other hesitates. Same opportunity, different identity. And identity is built through repetition, through past experiences, through emotional conditioning, through everything you've been exposed to. But here's the part that changes everything. If identity was built, it can be rebuilt. You are not fixed. You are not defined by your past. You are not permanently wired to stay where you are. But you cannot change your identity if you are not aware of it. And most people are not aware. They are just reacting, repeating, reinforcing the same version of themselves every single day. So the real question is not, what do you want to achieve? The real question is, who do you believe you are right now? Because that answer is quietly shaping every decision you make. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to force results, and you start focusing on something much more powerful, becoming someone different from the inside. Because when identity shifts, everything else follows, but there is still one force. That keeps this identity locked in place, stronger than logic, stronger than intention, fear. And if you don't understand how fear is controlling your decisions, you will keep thinking you're choosing your life, when in reality, you're just reacting to what you're afraid of. And that's what we're going to break down next. Fear, the invisible force controlling your life. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a control system, Most people think fear shows up only in big moments, when you're about to take a risk, when you're about to make a decision. But that's not how it works. Fear operates quietly, in the background, influencing your choices, before you even realize you're making them. You don't just fear losing money. You fear what losing money would mean. You don't just fear failure. You fear what failure would say about you. You don't just fear growth. You fear what you might lose if you change, and that fear shapes your behavior. It makes you hesitate when you should move. It makes you overthink when you should act. It makes you delay when you should decide. And the most dangerous part is it feels like logic. You tell yourself, I need to be more prepared. This isn't the right time. I should wait a little longer. But underneath all of that is fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being judged. Fear of stepping into something unfamiliar. Because the mind doesn't care about your potential. It cares about your safety. And safety is found in what is known. So even if your current life is limiting, even if it frustrates you, even if you know you're capable of more, your mind will still try to keep you there. Because to your subconscious, familiar equals safe. Unknown equals danger. And growth is always unknown. This is why fear becomes a prison, not because it stops you completely, but because it keeps you moving in circles. You move forward, then you pull back. You try, then you hesitate. You commit, then you doubt, and over time, this creates a pattern where you never fully step into your potential. Not because you can't, but because fear keeps you operating below it. And here's something most people never realize. Fear doesn't always feel intense. Sometimes it feels subtle. It feels like distraction, procrastination, indecision, lack of clarity. But those are just softer forms of fear. Because when your mind is afraid, it doesn't always say, I'm scared. It says, let's do it later. And later is one of the most dangerous words in your life. Because later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes never. And all the while, you stay exactly where you are. Not because you lack discipline, but because fear is directing your decisions. Now here's where it connects with everything we've talked about. Your identity was shaped by past experiences. Your programming was built through repetition. And fear is what keeps both in place. Fear protects your current identity, even if that identity is limiting you. If your identity says, I'm not ready, fear will give you reasons to wait. If your identity says, I can't handle more, fear will make growth feel overwhelming. If your identity says, I don't belong there, fear will make you avoid opportunities that could change your life. So fear is not random. It is aligned with your programming. It reinforces the version of you that you've been conditioned to be. And unless you become aware of this, you will keep thinking you're making decisions consciously, when in reality, you're reacting to what you're afraid of. This is why so many people stay stuck for years. Not because they don't want more, but because fear makes staying the same feels safer than changing. But here's the truth that changes everything. Fear is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that you're approaching something unfamiliar. And unfamiliar is where growth begins. So the goal is not to eliminate fear. The goal is to stop obeying it. Because the moment you stop obeying fear, you start reclaiming control. And once you begin making decisions based on intention, instead of fear, your entire life starts to shift. But there's still one final piece of this pattern that keeps people stuck even when they understand everything we've talked about. Because knowing is not enough. Understanding is not enough. Even awareness is not enough. There is something else that determines whether you will actually change or go back to the same patterns again. And that is what we're going to break down next. Why knowledge is not enough. The action gap that keeps you stuck. Most people already know what they should do. They know they need discipline. They know they need focus. They know they need to think differently. They've watched videos, read books, heard the same principles over and over again. And yet, nothing really changes. Not permanently. Not at the level they expect. Because knowledge does not create transformation. Execution does. And here's the uncomfortable truth. There is a gap between what you know and what you actually do. That gap is where your life is decided. You can understand everything about success. You can explain it. You can teach it. You can even motivate others. But if your actions don't reflect it, your reality will stay the same. This is why some people consume content every day, but stay stuck for years. They are not lacking information. They are lacking integration, because information is passive. Integration is active. Information sits in your mind. Integration changes your behavior. And most people never cross that line. They listen, feel inspired, and then return to the same environment, the same habits, the same patterns. And slowly, that inspiration fades, not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't reinforced. This is the cycle. You learn something new. You feel motivated. You promise to change. And then life continues. Distractions appear. Old habits return. Comfort pulls you back. And without realizing, you go back to your baseline. This is not failure. This is lack of structure. Because your mind needs more than understanding. It needs repetition, consistency, proof. You don't change your life by hearing something once. You change your life by repeating something until it becomes part of you. That's how your current programming was created, and that's how it must be replaced. But here's where most people get stuck. They wait to feel ready. They think, I'll start when I feel motivated. I'll change when I feel confident. I'll act when I feel certain. But those feelings are a result of action, not a requirement for it. Confidence comes after movement. Clarity comes after action. Momentum comes after starting. If you wait to feel ready, you will wait forever. Because the version of you that feels ready does not exist yet. It is created through action. So the real shift is this. You stop asking, do I feel ready? And you start asking, what action aligns with the person I want to become? That question changes everything. Because now, you are no longer reacting to your current state. You are acting from a future identity. And this is where real transformation begins. Not when you understand more, but when you start moving differently, even before it feels natural. Even when there is resistance. Even when there is doubt. Even when it feels uncomfortable. Because discomfort is a sign that you are breaking patterns. Now here's the most important part of this entire block. Your brain does not change through intention. It changes through repetition of behavior. Every time you act in alignment with a new identity, you weaken the old one. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you rewrite your internal pattern. Every time you move forward despite fear, you prove to your mind that you are different. And over time, those small actions become evidence. And evidence builds belief. And belief solidifies identity. That's the process. So if you want to change your life, you don't need more information. You need more aligned action, not perfect action, not massive action, consistent action. Because consistency is what reprograms the mind. And once your mind is reprogrammed, everything else becomes easier. But to make this practical, you need a way to start applying this immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. No. So in the next part, we're going to break this down into a simple, practical system that you can start using today to begin reprogramming your mind on purpose. Because understanding is the beginning, but execution is what changes everything. How to reprogram your mind, a practical system you can start today. If your mind was programmed, then it can be reprogrammed. Not with motivation, not with random effort, but with structure. Because your current mindset was not created by accident. It was created by repetition. So the only way to change it is through intentional repetition. And this is where most people fail. They try to change everything at once. They get overwhelmed. They stop. So instead, you need a system. Simple, repeatable, consistent. A system that works even when you don't feel motivated. And it starts with awareness. Step 1. Become aware of your automatic thoughts. You cannot change what you don't notice. Most of your thoughts are automatic. They happen without permission, without intention, without awareness. And those thoughts are shaping your decisions. So the first step is simple. Start observing your own mind. When you think about money, what is the first reaction? Is it, I can't afford this. This is too hard. I don't think I can do that. Those are not random thoughts. Those are programs. And once you see them, you stop accepting them as truth. You start seeing them as patterns. That alone already weakens their control. Step 2. Interrupt the old pattern. Awareness is not enough. You need to interrupt. Because if you just observe, but continue repeating the same thoughts, nothing changes. So every time a limiting thought appears, you interrupt it. Not passively, actively. For example, I can't do this becomes, I am learning how to do this. I always mess things up becomes, I am becoming more consistent every day. This is not about lying to yourself. It's about redirecting your mind. Because your brain listens to repetition, not to truth. Step 3. Install new commands. Now you don't just interrupt. You replace. You need to create new mental commands. Short, direct, repeatable. Not long affirmations. Not complicated phrases. Simple commands like, I am building discipline. I make decisions that grow my life. I handle money with control and awareness. I move forward even when it's uncomfortable. Can you repeat them? Not once, not twice, daily. Because repetition creates familiarity. And familiarity creates belief. Step 4. Align your actions with your new identity. This is where everything changes. Because if your actions don't match your new thoughts, your brain will reject them. So you need to act even in small ways, like the person you want to become. If your new identity is disciplined, then you do one disciplined action today. If your new identity is focused, you eliminate one distraction. If your new identity is someone who builds wealth, you make one better financial decision. Small actions, but intentional. Because every action sends a message to your brain. This is who I am now. And over time, those actions become proof. And proof builds belief. Step 5. Control your environment. This is the step most people ignore. And it's one of the most powerful. Your environment is constantly programming you. What you watch, what you hear, who you talk to, what you consume daily. If you stay in the same environment, you reinforce the same identity. So you need to change your inputs. Less noise, less negativity, less content that weakens your focus, more clarity, more intention, more content that strengthens your mindset. Even if you can't change your physical environment yet, you can change your mental environment. What you listen to, what you read, what you repeat. Because your mind reflects what it consumes. Step 6. Repeat until it becomes automatic. This is where real change happens. Not in one day, not in 1 week, but through repetition. Because your current identity was built over years. So you don't replace it instantly. You overwrite it gradually. At first, it feels unnatural, forced, uncomfortable. but that's a sign that it's working, because you are breaking old patterns. And if you keep going, something starts to shift. Your thoughts change. Your reactions change. Your decisions change. And eventually, your identity changes. And when identity changes, your life follows. Final truth of this system: you don't need to wait for a perfect moment. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need external validation. You just need to start. Because the moment you start acting differently, you begin becoming someone different. And that is how reprogramming begins. But there's one final piece that determines whether you will actually stay consistent or fall back into old patterns again. Because starting is easy, staying consistent is where most people fail. And that's exactly what we're going to break down next. Why you always go back, and how to stay consistent this time. Starting is easy. Anyone can feel motivated for a day. Anyone can decide to change for a moment. But staying consistent, that's where almost everyone fails. Not because they are weak, not because they lack discipline, but because they don't understand this. Your old identity does not disappear quietly. It fights back. The moment you start changing, you feel resistance. You feel doubt. You feel the urge to stop. And most people think something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. This is exactly what is supposed to happen, because your mind is trying to protect what is familiar. And when you start acting differently, you create internal conflict. Part of you wants to grow. Part of you wants to stay the same. And that tension is what makes people quit. They don't quit because change is impossible. They quit because it feels uncomfortable. So they go back. Back to old habits, back to old thinking, back to old identity. And once they go back, everything feels normal again. That's the trap, because comfort is what keeps you stuck. So if you want to stay consistent this time, you need to change how you interpret discomfort. Discomfort is not a sign to stop. Discomfort is a sign you are breaking patterns. If it feels unnatural, you are doing it right. If it feels difficult, you are doing it right. If it feels uncomfortable, you are doing it right. Because growth never feels familiar in the beginning. Now here's the shift that changes everything. Stop expecting it to feel easy. When you expect ease, you quit at the first resistance. But when you expect resistance, you stay. You stop being surprised by discomfort. You stop interpreting it as failure. You start seeing it as progress. And that alone keeps you moving. Now let's make this practical. Rule 1. Never miss twice. You will fail at some point. You will lose focus. You will skip something. You will fall back into old habits. That's not the problem. The problem is staying there. So the rule is simple. You can miss once, but never twice. If you break your pattern today, you return tomorrow. No negotiation, no excuses, because consistency is not perfection. It is recovery. Rule 2. Lower the standard, not the commitment. Some days you won't feel strong. Some days you won't feel motivated. On those days, you don't quit. You reduce the effort. If you plan to work for 1 hour, do 10 minutes. If you plan to read 1 page. But you do something. Because what matters is not intensity. It's continuity. Rule 3. Stop trusting your feelings. Your feelings are not reliable. Some days you will feel confident. Other days you will feel doubt. If you act based on how you feel, you will always be inconsistent. So instead, you act based on decision. You decide who you are becoming, and you act accordingly, even when you don't feel like it. That's how identity is built. Rule 4. Make it hard to go back. Remove what pulls you down. Distractions, bad habits, environments that weaken you. Because willpower is limited, environment is constant. If you control your environment, you reduce resistance, and consistency becomes easier. Rule 5. Remind yourself daily, your mind forgets. It goes back to default, so you need to remind yourself every single day who you are becoming, what you are building, why you started, because without reminders, old patterns take over again. Consistency is not about strength, it's about structure. And once you build that structure, you stop relying on motivation. And when you stop relying on motivation, you become unstoppable. Now understand this clearly. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to stop quitting. Because the person who keeps going, even imperfectly, always outgrows the one who keeps restarting. And that's the difference between people who change their lives and people who stay stuck for years. Not intelligence, not talent, not opportunity, consistency. And if you apply everything you've seen in this video, not perfectly, but consistently, your mind will change. Your identity will change. Your decisions will change. And when your decisions change, your life follows. Final transition to closing. You are programmed, but you are not stuck. You were conditioned, but you can choose differently. The only question now is, will you go back, or will you finally move forward? And that decision starts now. The decision that changes everything at this point, you already understand. You understand that your mind was programmed. You understand that your identity has been shaping your life. You understand that fear has been influencing your decisions. You understand that knowledge alone is not enough. So no, this is no longer about information. This is about decision. Because from this moment forward, you cannot say you don't know. You can't say, I didn't understand what's happening to me. You can't say, I don't know why I keep going back. Now you see it. And once you see it, you have two choices. You can go back to your old patterns, back to automatic thinking, back to reacting instead of choosing, back to the same identity that has been keeping you in the same place. Or you can start something different, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, not when everything is perfect. No, because the truth is, there will never be a perfect moment. There will always be doubt. There will always be resistance. There will always be reasons to wait. And if you keep waiting, you will keep repeating the same thoughts, the same habits, the same results. But if you decide now, even in a small way, everything begins to shift, not instantly, but progressively. Because change is not one big moment. It's a series of small decisions, repeated daily. And those decisions start with one simple thing. You stop obeying your old programming. When your mind says, wait, you move. When your mind says, this is hard, you continue. When your mind says, this isn't for you, you act anyway. That's the moment you take control. That's the moment you stop being a product of your past and start becoming the creator of your future. And understand this. You don't need to become perfect. You don't need to become someone else overnight. You just need to stop being the version of you that keeps going back. Because the moment you stop returning to your old self, you automatically start moving toward a new one. And that new version of you is built through every decision you make from now on. So don't leave this video inspired. Leave this video decided. Decided that you will observe your thoughts. Decided that you will interrupt old patterns. Decided that you will act, even when it's uncomfortable. Because that's how change happens. Not through motivation, but through commitment. If this message made you see something you hadn't seen before, subscribe now. Because this channel is about one thing, helping you take control of your mind, so your life stops being controlled by it. And comment below, I refuse to stay programmed for lack. Write it as a decision, not as motivation. Because the moment you start commanding your mind, instead of obeying it, everything begins to change.